I was in the middle of pruning my hydrangeas when I noticed the white envelope tucked among the rest of the mail, its edges crisp and square, the handwriting unmistakably Everett's. For a brief moment, I felt the familiar flutter in my chest, the kind that used to come when he was a little boy, bringing home hand-drawn birthday cards. I dried my hands on my apron and opened it slowly, careful not to tear the corner. There was no greeting. No dear mom, no warmth. Just one clean line written in blue ink. Please don't come to the family dinner this year. We've decided it's for immediate family only. No explanation. No apology. My fingers lingered on the paper as if maybe the meaning would soften if I held it long enough. But it didn't. I walked back inside, set the letter on the kitchen counter, and stared out the window at the soft afternoon light stretching over the fence. The tea kettle started whistling sharp and bright, cutting through the quiet. I turned off the stove, poured the water, and sank into the breakfast nook where Gerald and I used to sit every Sunday morning. The last time Everett had visited this house, he'd sat in that very seat across from me. We'd laughed over lemon scones and talked about his new job. That was before Vanessa began managing the family calendar, as she called it. Before the calls became shorter. Before the silence grew heavy. I reached for my phone and typed out a reply. Understood. One word. Not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to say. Then I opened my drawer, pulled out the neatly printed reservation contract for the Lakeside Inn, and read the header again. More Family Spring Gathering. Reserved by Celinda Moore. Confirmed 6 months ago. I folded it once and slipped it back into the folder right where it belonged. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I sat at the table for a long time, cupping the warm mug between my hands, watching steam rise into the afternoon sunbeams cutting across the kitchen tiles. My mother used to say, disappointment doesn't sting until the silence settles in, and she was right. The letter's weight didn't land until after I'd replied. It wasn't just the words, it was what they confirmed. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a scheduling mix-up. It was intentional. Everett and Vanessa had decided together that my presence no longer fit their definition of family. I kept turning that phrase over in my mind, immediate family only. And where did that leave me? I'd hosted the dinner myself for nearly a decade. After Gerald died, it was the one thing I clung to. Every spring, I'd send out hand-addressed invitations, plan the menu with care, choose the wine that best suited the season. It wasn't just about the food, it was about tethering the family to something steady, something rooted. Now it seemed I had become optional. The first time Vanessa came to the dinner, she wore a silk scarf, knotted too tightly at her neck, and called my deviled eggs quaint. I'd smiled, of course. I always smiled. Even when I started noticing little changes, Everett deferring to her on seating arrangements, on whether his cousins should be invited on, if we really needed a dessert buffet, I told myself it was normal. Newlyweds find their rhythm. But the rhythm never included me. I walked down the hall to the study and pulled open the cedar chest. Inside were 10 years' worth of menus, guest lists, hand-labeled place cards wrapped in twine. I ran my hand over them as if touching them could hold something together. They hadn't just cut me out of a dinner. They'd erased me from something I had built. Back in the kitchen, I stared again at the folder on the counter. The inn, the caterers, the musicians. All booked, all prepaid, all mine. The truth is, I've always been a planner, not just by trade, but by instinct. Even as a girl, I lined up my dolls by height and arranged their plastic teacups in perfect symmetry. It wasn't control I craved, it was harmony. That quiet satisfaction when everything had a place and everyone felt like they belonged. When Gerald and I married, we built this house room by room, not just the walls, but the traditions. Sunday brunch with peach jam, Friday night card games with friends, and of course the spring dinner. He'd tease me every year. "You sure it's not a wedding you're planning, Rainy?" He called me that short for Celinda, even though no one else did. Rainy like a light drizzle, a gentle presence. After he passed, I didn't let myself collapse. I poured my grief into napkin folds and candlelight arrangements. I made sure Everett and Junie came every year, and when Everett met Vanessa, I was the one who printed her name on a place card before she ever officially RSVP'd. It mattered to me making people feel included. I used to teach Junie how to fold linen like origami. She was only 8 when she asked me if table runners had to match the dessert. I laughed so hard I nearly cried. She always loved the flower centerpieces the most, especially the ranunculus. That year, Everett offered to help set the tables. I remember his hands fumbling with the cutlery, his eyes scanning the room, like he was afraid of getting something wrong. "I don't know how you do this every year, Mom," he'd said. "You make it all look effortless." I didn't tell him about the sleepless nights, the hours comparing floral vendors, the panic when the bakery once delivered the wrong cake. It wasn't about ease, it was about care. So when I read his letter and the coldness in it wasn't just hurtful, it was foreign, like he had forgotten the language of the life I gave him. The next morning, I went out back and clipped fresh eucalyptus for the centerpieces. Let them make their own plans, I still had mine. The day of the dinner arrived with soft gray clouds and the scent of rain in the air fitting somehow. I spent the morning quietly brewing tea, folding the last of the cloth napkins, arranging the eucalyptus in low vases. The house was still. Not lonely, just still. The kind of stillness that settles when you've accepted something, even if it bruises. I didn't go to the inn right away. I waited until late afternoon when I knew the staff would be moving chairs and checking wine glasses, but before the guests began to arrive. The moment I stepped through the lobby doors, the smell of lavender and warm wood greeted me like an old friend. I'd chosen this place for a reason. Every corner had grace. It reminded me of the way Gerald used to enter a room, quietly making everything better, just by being there. I greeted the staff with nods and a few soft instructions. They knew me by name. Every detail had been confirmed days before, but I walked the rooms anyway. The tables were round, draped in ivory linen with gold-rimmed chargers, and the place cards I'd handwritten weeks ago. Everett's name still sat at the head seat. Vanessa's to his left. I hadn't removed them. I walked to the back terrace where the lake shimmered beneath an overcast sky. The musician was tuning his cello, the low hum blending with the breeze. I stood still for a long time, letting the weight of the moment pass through me like wind through screen doors. No one had called to cancel the reservation. No one had reached out to ask if I was coming. As far as they were concerned, the dinner would proceed without me. I took one last look at the tables. My name wasn't on any place card, but my fingerprints were on every surface. I turned to leave, slipping through the kitchen exit, the way I'd taught my assistants years ago: leave quietly, but make sure everything runs exactly as it should. That evening, I stayed home, lit a candle, and waited. I made a plate of crackers and sharp cheddar, and settled into my favorite armchair, the one with Gerald's old Afghan, draped over the back. I didn't turn on the television. I just sat, candle flickering on the side table, the scent of eucalyptus still clinging to my sleeves. Outside, the wind stirred the branches, and I imagined the candles being lit at the inn guests, arriving in their pressed shirts and borrowed pearls, the sound of glasses clinking. The phone stayed silent. Not a call, not a text, but I didn't need one. I already knew the rhythm of that evening, down to the way Everett would clear his throat before trying to make a toast. He never liked speaking in front of groups, not even small ones. I imagined him rising slowly, lifting his glass, saying something about family, about tradition, about how grateful he was. I could almost hear it. But then again, I wasn't there to write the words this time. I wasn't there to time the dessert or remind him to thank the staff or whisper to Junie to straighten her collar. I wondered if he'd noticed the arrangements, if he looked down and realized the name cards matched last year's font, if he'd tasted the lemon thyme chicken and remembered it was my recipe, if he'd glanced at the flower centerpieces low, soft, wild, and remembered how I always said, flowers should make people breathe differently. Maybe not. But someone must have, because 2 hours later my home phone rang. It wasn't Everett. It was Junie. Grandma, she said, her voice hushed, but certain they're saying you didn't want to come. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice calm. Is that what they told you? She was quiet a moment. Aunt Beth asked where you were. Uncle Louis said you were tired, but I knew better. I saw your handwriting on the place cards. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because she had seen me even when they tried to erase me. I saved your seat, she whispered. I closed my eyes and let her words land gently like petals on water. The next morning, I found myself moving slower than usual, as if the weight of the night before still hung on my shoulders. I stood at the kitchen sink, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee, when I noticed something tucked halfway under the front door. A white envelope. No stamp. I picked it up and turned it over. No handwriting on the outside, just my name, printed cleanly in block letters, Celinda. Inside was a folded sheet of stationery and a single sentence written in Everett's familiar hand. Let's talk soon. That was it. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Just 3 words. I read them twice, then folded the paper back and set it on the counter. I didn't need to rush into anything. Not anymore. I spent the rest of the morning trimming back the garden, pulling deadheads from the marigolds. The breeze was warm, and the silence felt steady, not sharp. For once, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone to call to explain, to offer me a place that I had built myself. Around noon, I heard the familiar knock-light rhythmic. Ruth, my neighbor's granddaughter, stood on the porch, holding 2 lemonades, her face half hidden behind a mess of curls. I thought you might want company, she said, holding one out. We sat on the porch steps, watching the street hum with its usual Sunday quiet. Ruth talked about her math test, her new bike, and how she missed the cookies I used to bake. Then mid-sip, she added, my mom said it was weird you weren't at the dinner. She said it's always your thing. I nodded slowly. It used to be. She tilted her head, studying me. I think it still is. It just didn't know it yet. I smiled at that, and together we sat in the sun a little longer. When she left, I returned inside and noticed the envelope still resting on the counter untouched. Next to it, I found something better. Junie's note crumpled from her small hands with 1 sentence in crayon. Next year, I'll sit by you. I cleared a small space on the bookshelf beside the window and set Junie's note upright, pressing the folds gently flat. The crayon letters were uneven, a little smudged, but each word stood proud. I reached for an old silver frame, one that had held a photo of Everett in his cap and gown, and swapped it out for the note. The photo, once so full of hope, had grown heavy in its meaning. I wrapped it carefully and placed it in the drawer with the others. Later that afternoon, I checked my email and saw another message from Everett. Short again. I meant what I wrote. Let's talk. Maybe this weekend. Still no acknowledgement of what had happened. No mention of the letter or the dinner or the silence that came after. Just a vague gesture as though small talk could bridge a canyon. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to the attic and opened a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were scraps of fabric, old menus from spring dinners, past a stack of hand-drawn seating charts, each with notes scribbled in the margins. Junie's name had appeared on everyone since she was born. I lingered on one from 5 years ago, Gerald's last dinner. He'd worn his best linen blazer and gave the toast when Everett froze mid-sentence. Afterward, he'd kissed my cheek and whispered, "You hold it all together, Rainey." I held the chart in my lap for a long while, breathing in the soft dust and memory. When I came downstairs, The sun had dipped low, stretching long shadows across the hardwood. I lit the lamp near the bookshelf and stood in front of Junie's framed note again. My hand rested on the edge of the shelf steady. It wasn't that I needed Everett's words to feel seen. It was that for too long I'd mistaken silence for survival politeness, for peace. That season had passed. The following morning I woke early and opened the folder from the inn. I made one call just as the sun broke through the trees. The woman on the other end of the line answered on the second ring. Celinda came Eloise's voice, warm and familiar. "I was just about to call you." I smiled into the receiver. Eloise and I had grown up 2 blocks apart, cousins by blood, friends by choice. For the last 3 years, she'd edited the family newsletter, a modest PDF circulated every season, full of recipes, baby announcements, and stories that only meant something if you'd sat at one of our tables. "We're doing a spring issue," she continued, "and I wanted to ask if you'd write something. A little piece about Grandma Inez, or maybe your first garden. It's not the same without your voice in it." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded as if she could see me. "I'd love to." The words came easier than I expected. That afternoon, I pulled out one of Gerald's old notebooks, the ones he used to leave blank, saying my stories deserved better pages, and began to write. I wrote about the matriarchs who made bread without recipes and loved without conditions. About my mother's calloused hands and my aunt's peppermint lotion. I wrote about the small quiets that held our family together, folded napkins, polished silver, a humming kitchen at dusk. I sent the piece to Eloise before dinner, half expecting her to reply later in the week. But before I finished cleaning up, her name lit up on my phone. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice thick. "I'm putting it on the front page. Your name's going right at the top." I didn't say anything at first. I just let the silence stretch between us, not awkward, but full. Later that night, I printed a copy of the draft and placed it beside Junie's note on the bookshelf. Side by side, they didn't clash. They completed something. The next morning, I walked down to the market and passed Mrs. Callahan by the flower stall. "I read your column," she said, touching my arm gently. "You reminded us who we are." I thanked her, then continued on toward the post office with a letter in my hand addressed to Everett. The letter I sent Everett was brief. No stories, no folded regrets. Just a simple request. "Please be honest when you call." 3 days later, he did. His name flashed on my phone while I was folding laundry. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom," he began, voice low. "I think things got miscommunicated." I sat down slowly. "Were they?" There was a pause on the other end, the kind that holds more truth than words ever could. "Well," he continued, "Vanessa thought it might be too complicated with the extended family, with the space and all. I waited. And, we weren't sure if you'd be comfortable. You've been saying you prefer quiet these days." My voice was steady. "Was I invited, Everett?" Another pause. Then quietly, "No." I exhaled, not because I was surprised, but because hearing it aloud took something out of the air between us. "Vanessa said he started again." "Then there's nothing to fix," I said. "I don't need reasons dressed as kindness." He went quiet. I could hear something clink in the background. Maybe a glass. Maybe his wedding ring tapping the counter the way he did when nervous. "I miss when things weren't like this," he finally said. I nodded to myself. "Then maybe you should ask when they changed." He didn't respond. "I'm not angry," I added, "but I am clear now." We ended the call soon after, without ceremony. No promises, no plans. Just a soft click. I sat with it for a long time, the empty hum of the house wrapping around me like a quiet benediction. Then I folded the last towel, and placed it neatly in the basket. Later that afternoon, I gathered my gardening gloves and shears, stepping out into the mild breeze. Near the back of the yard where the grass met the stone path, there was a patch of earth I'd been saving. By dusk, I had dug the hole and placed the young dogwood tree gently into the soil. I pressed the dirt around its base and gave it water from the old tin can. Gerald used to keep near the porch. The dogwood took to the earth like it had been waiting for a home. Its roots rested quietly beneath the soil, and its slender branches swayed in the soft spring air. I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the light shift through the leaves, thinking about how Gerald would have smiled at the symmetry of it all, a new tree planted just as old things were being laid to rest. That weekend, I returned to the library to volunteer again, sorting books for the children's reading room. The cardigan I used to wear, the soft navy one with worn elbows, had been freshly washed and folded on my desk. Someone had found it in the donation bin and returned it to me with a note. "We knew it was yours. It still smells like vanilla." It made me laugh quietly. On Sunday, just before supper, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find Junie standing beside her mother, holding a small tin of lemon cookies. Her eyes lit up when she saw the dogwood tree behind me. "You planted it," she whispered. I nodded. It needed a place to grow. We sat on the porch steps, the three of us sharing cookies and light conversation. Vanessa was quiet, her smile measured, but she didn't interrupt when Junie leaned into me and said, "I told Dad I want to come next year. For the real dinner." I ran my fingers through her hair. "You'll always have a seat here." She rested her head on my shoulder, and for a long moment, we simply watched the tree together, its leaves trembling in the breeze. After they left, I stood in the doorway, the evening settling gently around me. I didn't reach for the phone. I didn't wait for an invitation. I turned off the porch light, stepped inside, and closed the door behind me with quiet certainty. Somewhere down the street, a wind chime sang, and I let it carry the last of it away.